So in our first 5 parts we talked about how Euron wants to wed the Kraken to the dragon and bring about the Long Night. But there's a coalition of houses that want to do the opposite, the Alliance of the Reasonable, the Botleys, the Harlaws, and the Blacktides. And you may not realize it, but they're central to Stannis' war for the North. You see, there is this Botley bastard named Wex. Wex has an almost supernatural ability to hide and spy. After the fall of Winterfell, Wex hid in a tree in the Godswood. The Boltons searched the Godswood twice and didn't find Wex. On top of that, Bran and Rickon brought their wolves to the Godswood afterwards, and they didn't smell Wex. With such an incredible ability to hide and spy, along with the fact that he's a mute, makes it seem that Wex has been trained as a little bird. Now Wex accompanies Theon and Dagmar Cleftjaw as they raid the Stony Shore. At the same time, Asha conquers Deepwood Motte, and Victarion conquers Moat Cailin. Now Theon of course comes up with a new plan. He asks Dagmar to feign towards Torrhen Square while he attacks Winterfell. Theon doesn't hold Winterfell for very long, the Boltons burn it and he's dragged off to the Dreadfort. If there's any consolation, Dagmar does inexplicably conquer Torrhen Square while the Northerners are trying to retake Winterfell, and Wex is left sitting in a tree. Now imagine for a moment that you're a 12-year-old sitting in a tree who has just seen massive, massive horrors. Well, the first thing I would do is try to run to the other Ironborn. In fact, other Botleys are with Dagmar Cleftjaw at Torrhen Square. Running to Dagmar at Torrhen Square just makes sense. He's the closest Ironborn to Wex, and Maester Luwin specifically said that Torrhen Square was about to fall to the Ironborn within Wex's earshot. And this isn't just what I would do, it's what other Ironborn would do as well. During the fall of Deepwood Motte, the Ironborn immediately think about running to Dagmar. Yet later in White Harbor, Robert Glover tells us that Wex did something unlikely. Rather than running to Torrhen Square like any logical person would do, Wex instead decided to follow Osha and Rickon. Now this would be a rather dangerous path to take. Obviously Shaggy Dog could easily kill Wex, and Wex would be crossing hostile northern lands. And I'm not sure what Wex would be getting out of it. Would Wex have enough forethought to know that Rickon's location is going to be important political information? Wex is a smart boy, but let's say that is his goal, to find out where Rickon is going. He would only need to follow them long enough until Osha mentioned their destination. Osha may have mentioned it right at the beginning of her journey when she was in front of the Heart Tree with Maester Luwin. She certainly left Winterfell with the attitude that she knew where she was going. The point being, the minute Wex found out where Rickon was going, he would then go to Dagmar Cleftjaw and the other Botleys. In fact, it's almost certain that Wex did go to Dagmar and the Botleys at Torrhen Square. How do we know? Because Roderick the Reader knows that Theon is alive. After the fall of Winterfell, Theon's fate is a mystery. Asha assumes that Theon is dead, and yet after the King's Moot, Roderick the Reader tells her to read Herrig. Now Asha never gets around to reading Herrig, but suspiciously Tris Botley seems to know all about it. A King's Moot can be nullified if a major claimant isn't there. Essentially, Theon invalidates the King's Moot. So if Roderick is telling Asha that Herrig is relevant, he must know Theon is alive. And Wex is the most probable source for this information. Now we know that Dagmar has a father-son relationship with Theon, and Wex has showed Theon nothing but loyalty. And the Botleys firmly believe that Theon is the heir. The point being, everyone at Torrhen Square should be focused on getting Theon back. However, Balon, in all of his dickishness, disowns Theon after his capture. So what are the Botleys, Dagmar, and Wex supposed to do? How are they going to get back Theon? Well, as I talked about last time, the Alliance of the Reasonable likely had a hand in offing Balon. With Balon dead, the Ironborn could sue for peace and negotiate Theon's release. Of course, that's not what happens. Instead, Euron returns and we get a King's Moot. Now it should be noted that Dagmar Cleftjaw doesn't come home for the King's Moot. And we don't see Fish Whiskers Botley either. The Torrhen Square crew stays put. What were they up to that was more important than a King's Moot? The King's Moot also changes things in that Asha brings her hostages back from Deepwood Motte. House Harlaw and the Alliance of the Reasonable now have some assets. Now after the King's Moot, the Iron Men lose Moat Cailin and Theon is brought to Winterfell. Stannis conquers Deepwood Motte and brings Asha on his march towards Winterfell. Tris Botley and the other Iron Men are kept in the dungeons at Deepwood Motte. And Wex mysteriously shows up in White Harbor. Now it's kind of ironic that Theon feels so lonely and unwanted at Winterfell, because so many Ironborn want Theon back. His sister wants him back to nullify the King's Moot, as does Tris Botley and the other Ironborn in the dungeons at Deepwood Motte. Dagmar thinks of Theon as a son, and he's with Botleys who think Theon is their true king. And there's Wex, his loyal squire. Not to mention House Harlaw and his mother, who is obsessed with Theon. Now, even though all of these Iron Men want Theon back, they only have 3 things to trade with. They have Torrhen Square itself, they have Rickon's location, and they have the Glover hostages. Now, the Glovers are absolutely obsessed with getting their children back, rightfully so. But they don't really have anything to trade with either. Yeah, they captured Tris Botley and a few other Ironborn, but returning those Ironborn to the Iron Isles means their execution, so they're kind of worthless hostages. Only if Theon can nullify the Kingsmoot is Tris Botley a valuable hostage. And so here we see the fundamental problem. The Alliance of the Reasonable has Glover hostages, and they want Theon. And House Glover wants those Glover hostages, so they need Theon. So what are these houses to do? Well, it starts to get a little more complicated. Wex shows up in White Harbor, where Robert Glover and Wyman Manderly are. And Manderly clearly wants Rickon back. Now that is quite a coincidence. The Alliance of the Reasonable only has 3 bargaining chips: Torrhen Square, the Glover hostages, and the location of Rickon. And here we have Wex talking to 2 men that want 2 out of the 3 Ironborn bargaining chips. Also coincidentally, one of the men has the means to get Theon. As I discussed in both my Cold Conspiracies and Pink Letter Mystery videos, it's fairly clear that there's a Manderly Umber conspiracy utilizing Mance Rayder to steal fake Arya. Among many other clues, Mance only enters Winterfell because the Manderlys leave behind their singer, and his plan dumps Theon and fake Arya right in front of the Umbers. Now really, this plan didn't need Theon. Mance and his Spearwives already showed the ability to get all around the castle murdering people, and frankly, they probably could have just climbed up Arya's tower and grabbed her from the window at any time. If anything, Theon was a liability. He was mentally unstable and could have ratted them out. So why did they include him as part of the team? Well, Theon wasn't part of the team. He was the goal. Back at White Harbor, Wex was acting as an emissary between the Ironborn, the Glovers, and the Manderlys. Keep in mind that Manderly doesn't trust his maester, so they would need an alternative go-between. Wex's abilities make him the perfect emissary, and explains why he's in White Harbor. He's there to negotiate. Now some may ask, isn't Wex illiterate? Considering how smart Wex is and how much information Glover and Manderly extracted from him, I would say there's no way in hell that he's illiterate. Once we accept Wex as an emissary, the negotiation becomes clear. The Alliance of the Reasonable will give up the Glover hostages and give Rickon's location in exchange for Theon. But of course, it's the Boltons who have Theon, so the Manderlys need to rescue him. Mance was already going to steal fake Arya. He can just tack Theon on. Now, if you're unconvinced about Ironborn cooperation in the Manderly Umber conspiracy, let me show you something else. As I've discussed before in the Littlefinger debt scheme, Tycho Nestori, the Braavosi banker, was in White Harbor. And we know this because Davos spies his ships, a cog, a galleass, and a galley. After going to the Wall, Tycho ends up in Deepwood Motte, and there he negotiates the release of Tris Botley and the other Ironborn. Now, Sybil Glover specifically said that she was going to use her Ironborn hostages to try to get her children back, so despite their limited value, selling them to Tycho would be insanity, unless something else were going on. Tycho then ends up with Mor's Umber outside Winterfell and gets a hold of Theon, and then Tycho ends up dropping off Theon, Tris, and the other Ironborn into Stannis' camp. It certainly seems like this Braavosi banker is facilitating transactions. And here's something else that's weird. We find out that 9 Ironborn survived the attack of Deepwood Motte. Asha is taken by Stannis, which leaves 8 for the Glovers. Tris Botley later tells us that an Ironborn named Crom dies, so that leaves 7. And later Asha even says that Tycho paid the ransom of 7. Yet only 6 Ironborn accompany Tycho. So where's the missing Ironborn? Did he go to Torrhen Square to talk to Dagmar? Did he go to Harlaw to get the hostages? Now there does seem to be a problem with trading for Theon and bringing him home to the Iron Isles. He's kind of a loser. He lost Winterfell. Is anybody going to vote for him in a new Kingsmoot? Asha's a big loser as well. Asha and Theon both need a big win to regain their Ironborn respect. Luckily, Stannis seems to be up to something, and it definitely involves the Ironborn. For example, Stannis specifically says that he captured Ironborn ships, and he says they were captured by the Mormonts. But where are the Mormonts? Asha talks to Alysanne Mormont, but where are her men? They're never mentioned in any of Asha's chapters. And Stannis eventually sends Alysanne Mormont to the Wall. So I guess she doesn't have any men to command? If those Mormonts are off in those Ironborn ships, Stannis has the element of surprise. He could attack Torrhen Square or Moat Cailin, though I think Barrowtown is the most vulnerable. The city is made of wood. The Mormonts could sail right in and burn the thing to the ground. And if the Dustins try to leave Winterfell to go and defend it, they're vulnerable from behind by either Stannis or the Ironborn at Torrhen Square. And here's something else that's suspicious. By the end of A Dance with Dragons, Stannis is done marching. His men are starving, and yet Stannis is maintaining 64 horses. This absolutely puzzles Asha. Stannis is clearly intending to strike something, but what? Well, at the very beginning of A Dance with Dragons, Stannis wanted to strike the Dreadfort, because it only has 50 men inside. However, Jon convinces him that it's a very strong castle, and 50 men are the equivalent of 500. But then there's Theon, who has a special ability to infiltrate castles. After all, he took Winterfell with less than 30 men. And he even knows a secret entrance to the Dreadfort that's never guarded. If Stannis sends just a few men led by Theon, they can easily take the Dreadfort. And if the Boltons try to take it back, Stannis can get them from behind. Now some may ask, doesn't Stannis want to execute Theon? Does he? Because Stannis has a track record of executing lookalikes. Theon looks like an old man. Stannis could just execute someone else in his place. Arnulf Karstark is an old man. The Ironborn are poised to win the North for Stannis, which is amazing considering they're also poised to win Essos for Dany. And we'll talk about that in Part 7.